All countries are invented, and there's nothing wrong with being invented. I mean, how else could we all exist if it weren't, if we weren't an invention? There's no logical reason for this to be.
First of all, good evening, bienvenidos. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Heber. Some of you I know may not have been here before, and to welcome you to the Imperial County Free Library. Just like television, you're going to have to listen to some messages from the sponsors before we get started with the actual program. One of the logistical things as a sponsor I want to mention is if you need a washroom, they're just down the hall there. We have water and coffee, and I won't be upset if you move while I'm talking so that you can pay attention when our guests are speaking. And we will be offering you something to eat after the program. So if you'd like to get a drink and whatever right this second, that's great, and get settled in. I want to take the opportunity to tell you just a little bit about Imperial County Free Library. We were established in 1912. We have a board back there that tells you a little bit about us, and a lot of the county doesn't realize we're here, but we actually serve all of the unincorporated areas of the county, along with the cities of Calipatria, Holtville, and Westmoreland. So we're out there, we're doing lots of good things. One of the things we're involved with and coming up is county-wide. Every public library in the county will be participating next month in Ivy Reads, which is the book Wet Desert that I have here, and we'll all have information at our public libraries for you, but we'll be fortunate enough to have another author visit come the end of April in conjunction with this read. So we invite you to join us for further adventures and conversations with authors. I'd like to take one more second to thank our sponsors, and then I'm going to turn this over to one of those sponsors for just a moment. This would not have been possible in any way, shape, or form. Someone said to me the other day, and they'll recognize who they were, "How did you get this luckiness to snag an author like Mr. Alarcon?" And it is completely through the California Humanities Council that is now called Cal Humanities. I'm retraining myself to say that, change in name for them. But thanks to them and other partners, including an organization called the California Center for the Book, which is dedicated basically to getting books out and people talking about them throughout the state of California through a variety of programs, and other sponsors who are listed on our flyers and have contributed money, including the California State Library and the, will you remind me? I'm blanking on the foundation. What's the other foundation I'm supposed to make? Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's their generosity that makes it possible for us to do something like this, and it is phenomenal to see this many people interested and coming out for an event like this. I would like to turn the mic over to Mr. Lewin, who is the chairperson of Cal Humanities, and he's going to say a few words.
Well, first, thank you, Connie. It's just so heartening to come out here on an evening like this and see the room filled with people who are passionate about literature. That is just fantastic. And I see a number of you have your books. I want to just take a picture of everyone. If you could hold up your books.
Yeah.
All right. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, look at that. I am so happy to see Heber, El Centro, Imperial Valley out tonight with their books in hand. Sorry? And Calexico, sorry. Catillo. Everybody. So happy to see you all tonight. And just so pleased, leadership that Connie's demonstrated by bringing this program to Imperial County. And, this is happening all across California. This is part of a big initiative called Searching for Democracy. And we weren't sure how many people would want to participate across the state, but thanks to Mary Menzel's great work at the California Center for the Book and staff members, Felicia Kelly and others on my staff, John Carroll and Tonya Jones, we have over 500 programs taking place across the state leading into the November election. So it's amazing when you think about it. This is happening all across California, from here all the way up to Mount Shasta. Even LA County's participating. But, you know, in the search for democracy, I can't think of a better place to begin that search than in Imperial County. It feels like, you know, as we grapple with issues of education, of water, of voting, of language, of how cultures work together, you all have been working on this for a long time. And it seems like this is, I remember coming out here probably about 20 years ago and going to a museum, the Pioneer Museum, that was, I think, newly established at that point. And they said, Ralph, you know, there's one thing you have to understand about this county, and that is we are the UN of the desert. And I said, what do you mean, the UN of the desert? They said, you know, the Sikhs live here, of course, people from Mexico, people from Oklahoma, from Tennessee, from Texas, from China, from Japan, from all over the world have made their home in Imperial County. So I think in this search for democracy, we can learn a lot from Imperial County. I'm delighted to see so many people here tonight, and Danielle, thank you for your writing, and we really look forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
I may steal that back for a second. My goof, I forgot to ask everybody to check their cell phones, please, and turn them to vibrate or silent or off or whatever it is you're doing so we won't have a distraction. Our format tonight is going to be with a set-up conversation here, so to speak, between Mary Menzel, who is with the California Center for the Book, an avid reader, a person who enjoys promoting reading, and for whom I couldn't come up with an embarrassing story to tell about. Having fractured my English there, I was trying to think one, search for one on that. And she will be doing an initial conversation with Mr. Alarcón, and then he will be responding to your questions, and we'll have stations set up for that, and if we need, we will have translation for that. It's my pleasure to introduce them both. I was so thrilled that you were willing to come here because I think that your books are both affecting and effecting. And I was excited when I saw an article very recently in the New York Times that was called, let me give you the correct title here, Neuroscience of Your Brain on Fiction. And the premise of the article was that basically fiction can provide us with experiences that our brain will treat as though we've had them ourselves. It's a fantastic way to expand what we experience in a way that we hadn't realized was as visceral previously, as research now shows. This article said, in one respect, novels go beyond stimulating reality to give readers an experience unavailable off the page, the opportunity to enter fully other people's thoughts and feelings. In his exploration of society, when the media is under the control of the government, Mr. Alarcón takes us to a dystopian location, one we experience with our protagonist, Norma. Mr. Alarcón is a notable and prize-winning author. You've probably read his biography in the book or the interview or seen other things. Partial list of his works and awards are there on the book, and there are others on the website for calhumanities.org. I found his voice outside of his writing, in the interviews I went to look at, as provocative and thought-provoking as the book was for me. So I hope that you will tremendously enjoy tonight's conversation with Mr. Alarcón. And with that, I'll shut up and sit down. Thank you.
Why, thank you, Connie.
Thank you, Connie.
As Connie said, we're going to have a generous amount of time for your questions, and a microphone will be set up so that we'll all be able to hear your question and our videographers will be able to tape your questions. I guess I will start right off. Let me just say there are a couple of seats up here. We're saving a couple seats in case the kids come in, but there are a couple seats if people want to sit down up here. Let me just say, maybe I should ask your wife this. The summer fiction issue of 2010, The New Yorker, features short stories by 20 authors under the age of 40. Are you familiar with this? It's called 20 Under 40. It's become pretty famous. They said these young writers capture the inventiveness and vitality of contemporary American fiction. How have you changed since you were named one of 20 under 40? How has he changed since he invented it? Or also, how has your fiction changed, or the writing process changed?
I think a lot of things have changed. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out, and thank you for holding up the books. I've never seen that before, and that was one of the coolest things. And you've got to make sure to send me that photo. So thank you all. I've never been to this part of California, although I've been living in California for 7.5 years now. So this is a real treat. I used to live near the border in Arizona, which is a little different, a little drier. But it's nice to be near the border again. And so yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Connie, for the invitation, and thank you, Ralph, and all your staff, and Mary, for setting this up. This is really cool. It so happens that it's my stepson's spring break, and it's my spring break from Cal. And so we took a little road trip here as a family, and I've been enjoying the desert quite a bit. So with that introduction, I completely forgot the question. It was about how I've changed since 2010. Well, so there was this list, and the sort of young writers under 40, and these things are pretty funny. A friend of mine has been joking about he wants to do a list of best American writers under 5'6". And the idea would be to just poke fun at the arbitrariness and the silliness of these lists. Having said that, it's much more satisfying to make fun of the list if you're on the list than if you're off the list. Yeah. I think the lists are useful for the sake of conversation. They're useful for the sake of debate. Anything that gets people talking about contemporary writing, I think, is exciting. I think there's a few writers that I was surprised weren't on the list. I was certainly thrilled to be on the list. It hasn't really changed my writing. So many other aspects of my life have changed in the last 5 years that, the being on the list or not being on the list is really not super consequential. The primary thing that has changed my writing has just been all the different projects I've been taking on that have sort of cut into my writing time, cut into my intellectual time. You only have so many, or I only have so many productive hours a day, like intellectually productive hours a day, maybe 4 max. Yeah. And writing fiction is very, very, very difficult and requires a lot of what would apparently seem to be, goofing off in other contexts is actually quite useful when you're writing fiction. Things like taking a walk, things like playing soccer, things like rereading a book you've already read 3 times. Those are things that I find very useful. It sort of helped me clear my head. Talking on the phone with certain other friends of mine who are writers, that's one of the most productive things that I ever do is discuss the plot as it's unfolding of my novel. So I have a good friend of mine named Vinny who has heard my entire book, the book I'm currently working on, has read very little of it, of the current version of it, but he knows exactly. So he's like, oh, okay, so what's going on now? Well, this is happening, and Nelson just did this, and then this, and he's like, okay. And it's just like as if we're talking about something that's actually happening, like what Connie was saying. To me, it feels like it's happening. But so the primary thing that's changed since 2010, and even since a little bit earlier, is that I don't have as much time. And partially this is a self-imposed affliction, because there's a lot of things that interest me and a lot of things that I want to pursue. And whereas earlier in my career, I couldn't do them, now I can do them, and so it's too tempting not to go out and try to do them. So in part, I'm a victim of my own curiosity.
Well, I see you out there. I see your name out there, and we're very grateful that you are giving time to this sort of thing. Are you working on long form now? Are you working on a novel?
I'm working on a new novel. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I'm 5.5 years into a new book. Lost City Radio took 7.5, so really I'm ahead of schedule.
This is good. I heard that you said in one of your interviews that you had 5 novels that you had abandoned. So are you resurrecting one of those, or is this something new?
No, this would be the 6th if I were to abandon it, but I'm not going to. This book, I'm primarily a novel reader. I think that the novel is the form that I most enjoy reading. And for that reason, it's the ambition of mine to be known as a novelist, because I find it to be such a malleable form, such a generous form. A short story is exciting, but it always feels like a letdown because it ends so quickly. And I generally think of stories, even the best stories I think of when I read them, I primarily think of them as how can I use this in an educational context? And pedagogically, how can I teach this story? Because they're very useful when I teach. When I teach high school students up to graduate students, I pick a story that I enjoy for X, Y reason. Whereas a novel, I'm often thinking of I've got to call someone up and read them this passage. I've got to explain this scene to somebody. I've got to, find someone who's read it so we can discuss what this means, and it's a different way of enjoying literature when I read a novel. For that reason, I keep pushing the long form. I keep trying with this novel where perhaps reason would suggest that I should have stopped by now, but I continue to try to work on this book because I love the process of reading a book, and I think when you read a novel, you fall in love with the characters. A well-written novel it's a yarn, it's a story. It's got all the things that cavemen used to have when they'd sit around the fire and tell stories about hunting the woolly mammoth. This is a very human need to share narrative, and to the extent that I can be a participant in that long tradition, I'm very honored. And I just keep trying, and I keep trying. One day I'm going to get it.
Yeah. And so is this set in the United States or in an imagined Lima again?
I spend a lot of time in an imaginary Lima. Mm-hmm. I spend most of my time in that city. And I go back, we're going back in 2 weeks. I go back a lot. And I think for one reason or another, when I visit Lima, I have a very intense curiosity that maybe wanes when I'm in other cities that where I live. Where I'm, San Francisco is a fine place to live, but I don't have the same passion that I might have for, say, Lima. In terms of wanting to explore, wanting to see every last nook and cranny of it, in terms of putting myself in places where I have to work to gain access to these cultures and these communities, and for whatever reason, that's just the way I've always approached Lima. So when I'm home in San Francisco now writing, I'm much more, throwing myself into that imagined city.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us here live someplace where we weren't born, and it was interesting to me. You had a really wonderful essay called "The Writing Life," published in the Washington Post in '06, and you talked about an abstracted variety of patriotism, which is love for the place one's parents are from. And that was interesting to me that Lima has this draw for you. You left there when you were 3. Mm-hmm. You moved to Birmingham, Alabama, I think your family did. Right. I was so hoping when I talked to Danielle on the phone the first time that he would say, "Hi. This is Danielle, can I help you?" But he did not. No.
There's a funny story about why I don't have a Southern accent, and I think it has the stories that my father walked in on one time. We spoke Spanish at home. That was the language that we spoke at home, and we were all my parents at the dinner table. We had to speak Spanish, but my sisters and I, and my sisters among the children, we all spoke English, and certainly in school with all my friends speaking English, and so inevitably a little twang, a little Southern, little spice adds comes into your language. And my father overheard my sister and I speaking my two sisters speaking in a kind of Southern twang, and from that moment on, he was horrified, and I think from that moment on, we started listening to NPR all the time. And it sounds funny, but I think it's also an awareness of an immigrant's awareness of the small markers of social advancement in a new country, and your accent is one of them. I mean, if you don't, Tom Brokaw does not speak with a Southern accent, like the Carl Castle or like all these like major sort of media figures, and you don't have to really be paying much attention to notice that. And we moved to this country so that primarily, we were doing fine in Peru. We didn't have to leave Peru. But we moved to this country, my parents did, because they wanted us to have a better opportunities and educational opportunities primarily. And so they looked around and they're like, well, education means you talk this way, like turn on that NPR and that's how you're supposed to talk. And maybe consciously or unconsciously, I certainly inherited that sort of idea, and I think that's the reason why I speak the way I do. And I think I regret to say there is an element of classism to that. There's an element of looking down on our neighbors. And I think that I've been thinking a lot about why this is. And the South is a really interesting place, and I don't know if Imperial County is the same way, but in the South in the 80s, there were not many immigrants. There were not many Latinos. And the people that I knew were either black or white. And both black and white went back in the South generations. They both had great-grandparents from the South. And so for a non-American growing up in the South, it was very much a place where everyone else had deep, deep roots and you were new. So I never felt that I belonged. I never felt out of place, and I enjoyed my childhood and whatnot. But it wasn't like being an immigrant and moving to New York City, where everyone's from somewhere else, or moving to any urban center. We were living in the Deep South where everyone is from the Deep South. And so dispensing with the accent wasn't hard. It didn't feel like any kind of treasonous act against my roots or anything. It's like, okay, well, why should I speak like them if I'm not them, So, but I'm sorry to disappoint you with my lack of an accent there.
It's okay. Well, since you mentioned NPR, I wasn't sure whether to mention Al Franken, but since you brought up NPR, he wrote in one of his books something that really struck me as we were looking at books to use in the Democracy Read and for California Reads, that you can love your country. A lot of us sort of educated types don't talk about loving our country. And you can love your country the way a kid loves a parent or the way an adult loves a parent. Because when you're a kid, you love your parent unquestioningly. And you resent anyone who questions your parent or criticizes your parent. As an adult, you love your parent with understanding and honesty, and you take the good with the bad, and you like to help your parent grow, and it's never too late to grow. And I thought that was kind of a nice way that I could be comfortable with the fact that I, as sort of your average, educated type of middle-aged white woman, I don't go around talking about saying I love my country and this is the best country. Mm-hmm. Even though my grandparents, like everybody else, came here from someplace else. So I'm just intrigued by this idea in Lost City Radio about loving a country that has let you down really badly. Mm-hmm. Letting down, loving a system. Well, maybe not loving a system, but loving a country that has done what really isn't in the best interest of the people who live in the country, because the people's love for their country comes through over and over in Lost City.
There's an idea in Lost City Radio that like a lot of the country that I write about is made up. I mean, it's the basis of it is Peru, but a lot of cultural details are added from different places because I wanted it to seem not like reality, but just above reality. So there's one statement that I remember hearing when I was traveling in Ghana in 1998, and it was very interesting. In Ghana, I would speak with people from Accra, and they would say, you're in Ghana, you must go out to the provinces. That's where the real country is. And you'd ask people where they were from, and they wouldn't tell you what neighborhood in Accra they were from. They would tell you where their parents were from. I thought that was fascinating. And then I went out, so of course I'm looking for the real experience. I want the real country. So I go out to the provinces. And they'd say, oh no, you have to go to Accra. That's where the real country is. And so it was this idea where the realness of the country is it doesn't exist anywhere. And there's also the idea that you get sometimes in Peru. You're in a little bitty town, middle of nowhere, and they're like, oh no, we don't know. That's out in the provinces. So we're, So it's like the provinces itself is like la provincia is always like farther out. You can't actually get there. It's like the phantom toll booth. You can't get to infinity. I was intrigued by that idea. So the idea of loving a country. I mean, you have to even break that down and talk about what is a country. I thought about this a lot in the context of Peru. I've thought about it a lot in the context of the United States. All countries. There was a funny moment a really bizarre moment actually recently when I think it was Newt Gingrich said something about the Palestinians having this invented idea or an invented nation. They're not a real nation or something like that. And I was thinking, for an American to say that is really, really an intense blindness of history. I mean, all countries are invented, and there's nothing wrong with being invented either. That's just the nature of modern statism. Like when the Earth was formed, there were not these boundaries drawn on the map. I mean, this is all new. And for an American who purports to be a historian to go around criticizing this other country for being quote unquote invented when we are the most invented country. I mean, how else could we all exist if it weren't if we weren't an invention? There's no logical reason for this to be, and all countries are like that. Peru certainly is an arbitrarily drawn creation, and the thing that's interesting about it is that those invented things become real over time. And finding those moments and finding those places where they become real, I think is quite a fascinating exercise. In Peru, I was living in a neighborhood called San Juan del Urigancho, in a district called San Juan del Urigancho, and I'd often thought about what does someone from the mountains have to do with someone from the city, and what does someone from the jungle have to do with someone from the mountains? I mean, it's so diverse and so many different ethnic groups and traditions, and but in certain neighborhoods, on the outskirts of Lima, there would be this polyglot, clash of cultures. There'd be a charapa living next to someone from Ayacucho, next to someone from, a working class district of Lima who'd gone for a better life in a new section of the town, and this kind of hybrid culture that you could call Peruvian was sort of being built on the spot, and I liked that. I thought that was an interesting thing to see, an interesting process to observe.
You were saying something when you were at the Cal Humanities office, I guess in January, about street-level democracy, because we were, pelting you with questions about the big issues of democracy because you were unfortunately chosen to be in this California Reads program. And you were saying that what's most inspiring is street-level democracy because people organize on a very small scale more effectively than the big concepts of democracy and the big structures of democracy. And I don't know if anybody pointed it out to you at the time, but one of the other books in the California Reads program is Rebecca Solnit's A Paradise Built in Hell, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster, where she makes exactly the same point, that when something really bad happens to a community, like an earthquake or a hurricane, people are really excellent at taking care of each other and their neighbors. And democratic structures are better at taking care of their own authority structure and not necessarily taking care of individuals. The individuals, she writes over and over, are out in the dinghies rescuing their neighbors from the roofs, or during the San Francisco earthquake, the neighbors are setting up soup kitchens in Central Park for each other. Whereas the big structures of our democracy
are floundering.
Floundering or just locking people up, figuring what's better is to maintain civil order, which usually just means locking up whoever doesn't look right. So it all seems to tie in that your book, although fiction, Rebecca's, is mostly reportage with some analysis, I just thought tied together beautifully. Maybe we should give you the book so that you can read it before
I
the
thought
year's
I'm a
end.
fan of Rebecca, so I would love to get it. You can put it on the list, Ralph. Take care of that.
Before we leave the topic of Lost City Radio, I do want to ask you something that Connie told me a few people had asked her. Of course, there are tremendous shifts in time. The structure of Lost City Radio is very, very far from linear.
Right.
There are flashbacks within flashbacks and flash forwards within flashbacks, sometimes in the space of one paragraph. You've made a leap, up 5 years and back 12. Can you talk a little bit about both the difficulty of doing that and why you would take that risk?
I wanted to do that for a variety of reasons. I was thinking about what happens to your brain when you're living a traumatic experience or when you're reminded of a traumatic experience. And there's this doubling where you feel like you're simultaneously in the present and you're also, shot back to that. And it's almost like when you hit your funny bone, you have that sort of ringing in your bones. With Norma, something triggers a memory, and the memory itself triggers other memories of many, many painful things, unresolved questions. I felt like I wanted, within the prose, to try to echo that psychological reality, to try to describe what it feels like to be sitting in an office, holding a list, and reading a name that reminds you of the man you loved, and who you don't know where he is, and what that feels like, what it feels like to. And I think we've all experienced something like this, where you're still in the present, and you have to continue to participate in a conversation that that it has certain sort of things that you have to do. There's an etiquette to a conversation. You can't just turn off, but at the same time feeling like the world is closing in on you. And there's a section that the chapter that ends, the scene that ends the first section. Norma's meeting, simultaneously seeing the list and seeing this name, and also reliving the first time that she met Ray's father. And there's many of you have heard, I'm sure, of Mario Vargas Llosa, Peruvian Nobel Prize winner, he is certainly someone that I've read a lot of, and we're all Peruvians, we're all influenced by him, and he's incredibly sophisticated with time, especially there's 3 or 4 of those early novels that are just tour de force in terms of structuring time in a way that you maximize the tension. It's like juicing an orange. You got to get all the juice out of. So you have a certain number of events, but the order in which you put them is going to let you get the absolute most amount of dramatic tension out of them. And so I was reading a lot of La Ciudad de los Perros, or La Tía Julia, or Guerra del Fin del Mundo, all these novels, especially Conversación en la Catedral, Conversation in the Cathedral, fabulous novel. And he's much more, demands of the reader a great deal of attention. And so I was writing that scene, and I was like, do I have to put a marker if I just write, these paragraphs, these sentences right next to each other? If my reader's paying attention, will they get it? And I really wasn't sure, and I did it, and I showed it to a few friends, and actually I didn't show it to a few friends for many, many months. I just left it there and kept going, but then when I showed it to people, they seemed to think that it worked, and so then I just had a green light to continue playing with that. But it came out of a need to create, in prose, a psychological reality that I think we've all felt at certain points.
Well, I think it worked.
Thank you. Thank you.
With that accomplished, they all felt better. You've told the story, I know, often about writing that sentence. Can you talk for a couple minutes about writing that sentence?
Yeah, that's the last sentence of the book. When you're approaching the end of a novel, you sort of have this momentum that really just sort of increases, and you start seeing the end, maybe 6 weeks before you get there. 3 weeks before you get there, you're like, okay, it's really coming soon. And and then, maybe I thought I still had 4 days of writing. And I wrote that sentence. And then I realized it was the end of the book. And it came totally out of left field. I thought, I'll be done with this next week. And I hit save, and then I saved it on like 3 other discs. And then I was so freaked out, I went and like took a walk around the block, and then came back, and then checked it, and it was still there. And then the next day, I actually wrote an extra scene where, Norma's looking out the window of the radio station, and she sees these, it's past curfew, but she sees 2 cars with headlights coming towards the radio station. And it was this kind of ominous thing, and I deleted that scene. And then I decided that was it. And the thing about it was, anything more I think would have been explaining too much. What I like about where the book ends, in the end it's a novel about a war, and it ends where it has to end. It ends with an unthinking murder. A killing that makes no sense. In the context of, it can only make sense in the context of a war. Otherwise, it's as arbitrary as getting hit by a bus, and it ends with young men, who are the people who do most of the killing, and they're not. The act that it's referring to, with this accomplice, they all felt better. It's because they've shot a man and his body's floating in the river, and they're in a canoe, and the body kind of follows them, and it's uncomfortable, And so the youngest of the soldiers, or I think it's the oldest of the soldiers, takes the oar and pushes the body towards the shore, and now the body's not following them, and they all feel better. And in a sense, that's what happened in Peru. We pushed the body away towards shore, so we could keep going down the river, and we would all feel better. There was a great deal of amnesia that happened, a great deal of deliberate political amnesia that took place in the decade after the end of the war. And it's described in the novel, this kind of institutionalized forgetting, forgetting as progress, and that, there's different ways of responding to trauma, but, and I think every person who's experienced trauma has a right to deal with it however they want to deal with it. But as a state, as a political entity, burying the dead and then forgetting where the graves are is not okay. And this is what happened. So when I had that image, I just felt that anything else was extraneous, and so then I cut it.
It had great power, and I think what also gave the novel great power is your really steadfast refusal to make the insurgents good guys or bad guys, and to make the army good guys or bad guys. You worked very hard on that, I think.
Yeah, I did. I think it's certainly the way the war was experienced. I mentioned earlier this district of San Juan del Brigancho in Lima, and it was a zona roja. It was a red zone during the war. Parts of it were places where the army wouldn't go, or there's even a sentence in the novel which says that the army wouldn't go there, the police wouldn't go there. I'm describing Tamoé, which is San Juan del Brigancho in real life. And I went to live there 10 years after the war had ended, so it was all very fresh, and everyone knew, and everyone had these memories of being victimized by Sendero Luminoso and victimized by the army. And they could tell you who did what when, but they didn't say, like, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. They would say, we were stuck. There was two, what they always say is like, entre dos fuegos, between 2 fires. And that was the reality of it. I think there's another thing, too, think about Afghanistan now, like, why are we there again? Like, can someone remind me? Like, I know that 9/11 happened. I remember that. I was alive and very conscious. But what does what's happening now have to do with that? And there's a logic to conflict, and there's a logic to war, that once you set it in motion, it doesn't matter where it began. You're killing because they killed us, or like now, American soldiers did this, and so they're doing this, and now we're doing that, and who are we fighting against it exactly? The same thing happens in any conflict. I mean, you can look at any, certainly look at what happened in Peru, and as it was experienced at the ground level, it was very much violence for violence sake, violence that breeds more violence. And the people who are stuck there are the ones who are on the side of peace, not really necessarily picking a side, but they just want it to stop.
Well, and also there's so much about forgetting and amnesia in the book. It's a wonderful recurring theme. I'm always a little bit torn. In America, certainly we make so many mistakes because we don't study history and we don't learn from what has happened to us before. But the problem is when you get into ancient grudges. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I feel as though if there were a reset button on our world so that we could forgive ancient grudges, maybe that would be a good thing as well. And I don't quite know how to navigate. I don't think that Etch-a-Sketch will arrive ever. That, Palestine and Israel, we say, okay, look, enough killing. We're starting from day one now. That's not the way human nature seems to be.
No, it's not. I was playing soccer last Sunday, and this guy kicked me really hard. And I remember the first time he came to play with us, and then he sent an email to everyone, "Oh, it was great playing with you guys." And I was like, "Was it really, you jerk?" And that's obviously a very small thing, but next time he plays, he might get kicked. It could happen.
Not spikes, I hope, just
No.
boots,
I mean, it's a contact sport. It's not something I'm proud of. I'm just saying it could happen.
The retribution always gets the foul, I have to tell you
Yeah,
this.
no, it's true. It's true. No, actually, I should explain this. I wasn't mad that he fouled me. Fouls happen. I was mad that when I called the foul, he gave me this look like I was making it up. And that's like sort of messing with your honor, because your honor is, in a pickup game, if I call a foul, it's because it was a foul. And if you're doubting me, then you're calling me a liar, and then that's when we have trouble. That's why I would maybe think he might get kicked next time.
You won't get any argument here.
Yeah, no. I mean, anyone who plays, this is like the ethic of pickup sports, right? And so if I'm able to hold this grudge over something so small, I mean, imagine, and this is a very blithe and joking way to get at something very serious, but history, we're all victims of history to a certain extent, and but we can choose to embrace our victimhood, or we can choose to move past it in positive ways. I don't really subscribe to the politics of grudges. I don't subscribe to the idea that that's the way forward. But I also I do believe that people mobilize when terrible things happen, and changes come when we say, okay, that's enough. This can't happen anymore. I don't know that a reset button is what I would press, even if we had it, because it would mean erasing the names and memories of a lot of important events and a lot of people. I think if there's one thing that I would like, although I also think of this as kind of completely Pollyannish, I would like to be able to trust everyone's good intentions, so that when we disagree, it's simply because we're not communicating well. I think one of the things that literature can do is allow you to, in a relatively stress-free and low-risk way, enter the consciousness and world of someone who might not be anything like you, whom you might disagree with, and maybe try to understand them. And maybe the next time you meet someone like that, maybe you can sort of assume that or allow that perhaps they have good intentions, that they aren't, just bad people.
Before I turn it over for audience questions, is the microphone just going to be at the back? So the microphone is there in the middle. Okay, so at some point there's going to be a microphone there. So at what point will that microphone be there? Okay. While you're doing that, Blair, I just want to talk about a little bit more about the writing life. Thanks a million. As I said, if you have a question, please do stand there and use that microphone. I just want to ask two more things, though, before we go there. Danielle wrote a wonderful introduction to a 2010 book called The Secret Miracle, in which over 50 authors talked about the art of writing the novel. I really recommend this introduction to everyone. And so I wanted to ask you about this passage about novelists. We don't know what we're doing, and for this very reason, we find it impossible to stop.
I think that's true. I mean, I think the last 5.5 years are certainly testament to the fact that I don't have any idea what I'm doing. In this current book, every time I read Lost City Radio, or I have to read it for talk about it, I'm always reminded that I don't remember writing it very much. I don't have any recollection of the struggles of sort of figuring things out. I know it must have happened, and all the files are on my computer, so I know that I'm the one who typed it. But I don't remember it being as difficult as the current novel that I'm working on. And I don't know if that's because I've whitewashed history, or it's kind of this very useful selective memory, or if it's the opposite. I'm beating myself up over how difficult this is, as if it's some kind of personal and artistic failure, and why can't I just take dictation from the world, and like I did with Lost City Radio, it was written and I didn't have to change a comma, and it was just published just like that. I mean, I don't think it's the latter, because I know that I spent a lot of time, but I think the ambition to tell stories is I mean, at least within me, it's constant, and I find myself often describing in words to myself, a scene or a person I meet, or a new neighborhood that I walk through or whatever, and sort of immediately transitioning to setting the world down in prose, even within my head, is just something that I do a lot, and I can't stop. I can't. Maybe even less than being a novelist, I think I'm a storyteller or a narrator, and I think the breadth of projects that I've been involved with has to do in part with that sort of thinking that while the novel is what I'm most, and I realize I just said earlier that I want to be known as a novelist, so I'm totally contradicting myself within an hour.
And we have it all on tape.
Yes. So you should edit this part out when. No, I think it's true that the novel to me is so important, but the story is also very important, and just the ability to go around and talk to people and collect these different types of narrative and share them. I think that's sometimes it'll be in the form of a novel, sometimes it'll be in the form of a short story or a piece of nonfiction or radio now.
Or your new radio narrative project. Tell us, please.
Yes. So a year and a few months ago, my wife Carolina and I were in a coffee shop, and we were talking about projects that we wanted to do. And I'd always wanted to do a narrative radio project in Spanish, sort of to take the aesthetic of a well-told piece of nonfiction for print journalism and transform it into radio. There's a show in the United States called This American Life that some of you may have heard, and I wanted to do that in Spanish. So we started this project. We sort of embarked down this path, and we found other partners to help us with certain things we didn't know, because really we didn't know anything about radio, how to produce radio, or any of that. And a year later, we have raised enough money to start producing. We produced an audio sampler with stories from. We have stories in the work from L.A., from Tijuana, from Mexico City, from Tegucigalpa, from Havana, from Santiago de Chile, from Lima, from Buenos Aires, from Bogota, Colombia, from Barcelona. So just, we've sort of created this network of journalists who are out there now producing audio. And what we want to do is tell stories that are not news, they're not headlines, they're kind of the stories behind the news, human stories. Some of the stories are very small, some of the stories are very funny, some of them are very dramatic, some of them are interviews with people you may have heard of, and most of them are interviews with people you've never heard of. But we had another idea in mind. In this country, the political right specifically is trafficking in the idea that the border is a really hard and fast line. And those of you who live here in Imperial County know that that's not true. And we Latinos know that's not true. We know that Mexicans want to hear stories from Colombia, and Colombians want to hear stories from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Ricans want to hear stories from Peru, and Peruvians want to hear stories about Bolivia. And we also know that the United States, with 55 million Latin Americans, is a Latin American country. I mean, that's more Spanish speakers than in Argentina and Colombia. And we think that's great. We think of the Americas as a cultural, as a kind of continuum, and we wanted Radio Ambulante to take advantage of that, to be able to share stories, from across the different the Spanish-speaking regions of the Americas and the world, and it's been very exciting. I mean, really exciting to get, just from the 45 minutes of audio we have up on the website right now, to get emails from Ecuador, from Panama, from Chile, from Colombia, from Argentina, from Spain. I mean, we have hits from Tanzania and Belgium and Indonesia on the website. People who are taking time to listen to the stories, and for us, it's just incredibly inspiring. And for me personally, as a novelist, it's like a gift. You are able to share your stories with the whole world. So that's the other reason why I'm writing less than I should, is because I'm spending a lot of time on that project. But it's great. It's been a great.
So it's the website that we go to at the moment to find it. It's not on our radio dial.
It's not on the radio dial yet. Our first podcast will come out in either 3 weeks or 5 weeks, depending on how much we're able to get done before we travel to Peru. But in April, for certain, certainly in April. And it's up on the website, which is radioambulante.org. That's like radio, ambulance with a C instead of a T, and org.
I feel as though people are being shy about coming up, like because we're speaking. Maybe we should sit quietly and drink water for a second. Please, we would love to hear your questions. And also, if you want to argue with Daniel about anything you read in Lost City Radio, I think you can see he can take it. If you want to say, actually, you kind of missed the mark with this.
I will post in the interim, I will post the link
Oh,
to
great.
the site
Great.
on the county webpage. And if you pick up a bookmark back there, we have the webpage.
Oh, wonderful.
Great. Thank you,
Thank you, Connie.
Well, I'll start it off. My name is Roy Durantes. I'm a local artist myself. What was it that inspired you to become a novelist? Was it an incident, an event, a realization? What was it that made you become a novelist?
That's a great question. I think I can't really point to a single event. I know that I have always told stories. I've always written. I've always been interested in narrative. My parents tell me that when I first started going to school in the United States, I didn't speak English just for the first month, while I got acclimated, and I was just kind of a little bit on the outside of the little kindergarten situation where I was at. But and after school they'd pick me up and I would tell these stories about how, we played soccer and I scored 99 goals, or we played football and I scored 19 touchdowns, and I was the quarterback and the running back and the wide receiver, and I was just constantly making up these tales. I only bring that up to say that I've always been sort of a fabricator of reality. Later on, I read a lot of Russian literature in high school. I read a lot of Dostoevsky, probably too soon to to really understand what was going on. But I do remember an intense experience with Notes from Underground, a book that I've never had the courage to go back and reread because it was so powerful for me when I read it. It's a mixture of philosophy and narrative that I just was shocked into action by. And by being shocked into action, I mean I was forced to write my first long story, which is unreadable. It's horrible. It's just very pretentious, and nothing happens. But it was ambitious, and I think that was important. And since then, I've never stopped. I've never stopped. I think it's a compulsion as much as anything else.
Thanks for coming down and really enjoying your conversation, your direction also. I need to frame my question a little bit, then I'll get to the question. It was very interesting to me reading the book. My mother tells stories of growing up in deep Mexico also, deep in the mountains in a ranch where they're very independent and they make their own houses, plaster them with mud. I mean, it's all hands on, okay? It's just stories for me. She lived down there 30s, 40s, came to the U.S. in the 50s. However, I never got the sense that she was nostalgic for that, her life, because lived here on the border. I mean, if she wanted to have some Mexican products, she would just drive across the border. Like you say, it's very porous. We would listen to Mexican radio stations, watch TV on real Mexican novelas. Not the U.S. Mexican novelas, but Mexican novelas. So I never got the sense from her that she was somehow nostalgic having left, because it was within eyesight almost.
Right.
From almost anywhere from Raleigh or El Centro. Did your parents transmit to you any nostalgic feelings having moved to Central South U.S. and not being able to drive across the border anytime they wanted to?
It's different.
And does that drive your interest in Latin American history, right?
I mean, my experience living in Tucson was that we were in Mexico still, and my experience of being in LA is that, even the white people are Mexican, it's just, it's incredible. Growing up in the Deep South in the 1980s was very different. Spanish was like speaking Esperanto, and a game my father and I would play was often, would be like, let's discuss the people standing right next to us. That was just a game, and my father, it was a psychological game, like what's the relationship between these two people? And we would have these conversations like standing, literally right next to them, and there was never a question of whether, they might understand what you were saying. To the point that if we met another Spanish speaker, it would be like, Renato Alarcón de Arequipa, Peru. ¿Y usted de dónde viene? It's like, we must introduce ourselves and, what are you doing here in this strange land? That was just the reality where we were. There was a few Peruvian families, and it started to change when I was in high school. And now, the South is a completely different cultural landscape. But I think part of being so isolated meant that we created this, my parents talked a lot about where we were from, and it created enough cultural connection, in my heart that, that I consider myself Peruano. I'm very American, and I'm proud of that, and I'm very Peruano, and I'm proud of that as well. And I remember thinking, this is the extent of my sort of cultural ignorance that was, but also this kind of misplaced adolescent nationalism, that all the things that I saw in Peru that I didn't see in Alabama were Peruvian in my head. So, for example, badminton. I'd never seen badminton in Alabama, but I saw it. Some cousins of mine were playing badminton one day, and I was like, oh, it's a Peruvian sport. I thought Volkswagen Bug, Beetles, because the Scarabajos were the only car that existed in Lima in the 80s. Literally, out of 10 cars, 9 of them were Volkswagen Beetles, those old ones. And so I was like, oh, it's a Peruvian car. And this was just a way I had of sort of organizing the world, and it made me very proud. I was like very proud of the fact that we were the country that invented the Volkswagen Beetle. You know? And I imagine that if I'd lived right on the border, I would have known that half of my ideas about Peru were preposterous and were boneheaded misinterpretations of reality. And yet they were very important to me as a very young man. There's a drink that Peruvians, the national soft drink is something called Inca Cola. And Inca Cola, if you didn't grow up drinking it, is disgusting, you know? And most non-Peruvians don't, take one sip and they don't like it. Tourists go to Peru, they buy the t-shirt because it's a funny looking t-shirt, and then they don't drink it at all. But we had a cousin, an uncle who lived in Miami. His name was Cali, and he had become almost Cuban, I gotta say, by the end there. But periodically he would drive up and visit us, and he would bring like a 6-pack of Inca Cola. And it was like, I'd never even drank it, but I loved it before I'd even tasted it, And I remember, sort of like fighting with my sisters over that last can of this disgusting soft drink, just because it had this sort of taste of Peru, and I don't know that there's any way that your parents could consciously teach you that. It just must have been in the air in our house. It just must have felt something about where we were and how isolated we were, and the way my parents. We had American friends, obviously, but their close friends were Peruvian, and still their close friends are Peruvian, of course. And there was something about that that just made it important to me to maintain that, to feel that connection. And I think if I'd grown up on the border, I would have a totally different relationship with my country.
Thank you.
You have to tell us now what it tastes like, though. Is it a cola? Like
It's
a Coke kind of
it's
thing?
yellow. It tastes
A
like
yellow Coke?
People say it tastes like bubble gum. Has anyone in this room ever tasted Inca Cola? Yeah. Delicious. It must be Peruvian, yeah. They say it has yerba luisa, which is lemongrass. Is the main thing. I mean, it goes really well with Peruvian Chinese food. It goes really well with Peruvian Chinese food for some reason. And it's also, this is interesting, and just a random cultural fact, that Coca-Cola is, of course, the world's soft drink and has penetrated every market that's ever tried to penetrate. Peru's the only country it could not beat Inca Cola. It could not beat the local drink, and so it bought Inca Cola. So for years, Coca-Cola came in and they were like, we're going to take over this market like we'd taken over every market, and they just could not get Peruvians to stop drinking this, bubblegum soft drink.
Wow.
And so they had to buy it.
That makes me want to go to Peru. That really, really does. Please ask us some more questions while we're waiting for you to get up there. I did want to ask you, Danielle, in your introduction to the book about novelists, you said that the 50 novelists, like all of us, have good days, bad days, and days where it is more useful to sit quietly and read.
Yes.
And I know you're very busy right now, so you probably don't read too much for pleasure. But if you really just want to read for fun, what do you read?
Chekhov.
For fun?
For fun. Chekhov for fun.
Really?
Really? Have you not? You have to go back and read Chekhov again. There's a book that I read last summer. It's the collected short novels. It's 5 short novels, like 120 pages each.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God! I mean, just the pleasure of just really, really, honestly, just for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to be pretentious here. It's really, it's not. Chekhov is not Tolstoy with these like boring diatribes about history, or it's not dense philosophical. It's just stories about people doing the terrible things that human beings do, but it's told with such irony and such this acuity of observation of just. I feel like when he's describing people, Russians from like the 1880s, he's talking about people I know in Oakland. Like, the same. He's just a really astute analyst of human arrogance, and really arrogance is what having too much self-regard in different situations is like the source of all drama. And he's just an absolute scientist about it. I'm just clinically accurate, hilarious, beautiful sentences. I mean, something about Russian translates well to English, maybe, but yeah, Chekhov.
That's a wonderful recommendation. Please.
Hi, my name is Esperanza Luque. I'm from the IVC College. I barely got your book. It was a present from I don't know who. Thank you. I was wondering, if you knew I had only 2 minutes to read a part of the book, which part do you think I should read?
Wow.
I'll give you 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Well, I would say,
Maybe we could have a vote.
yeah, no. I mean, this is read up to page 8, and if you don't want to keep reading, then stop.
No, but I mean, which part do you think is the best part of your book that you
No,
think I
but
should take from it?
But I think this is the question. Like, I want you to read the whole thing, right? So this is like a theoretical question, right? I think that it's perfectly fair and legitimate to pick up a book, especially if it was free. Read the beginning, and then like it's probably not my thing, like if you only had 2 minutes, I'd say read the back, or like I don't know, like look at the author photo. I don't know. But if you have 5 minutes, you might as well read to page 8, and maybe you might find another 5 minutes because you're like, oh, that was pretty good, and keep going. That's what I would say. But I mean, if you only have 5 minutes, maybe there's a great video, that interview that we did on the Cal Humanities website that's about 5 minutes long. That might encapsulate. In that interview, I talk more about what the book's about and the characters, and but there's no Cliff Notes version yet of this book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you facing a test, I wonder? Did you make your little 5 minutes accurate? Or
Yeah.
did you put something in there, like people watching the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's?
I think that's great, actually. I've talked about this book in probably hundreds of times. I've never gotten that question before. That's a great question.
Good, thank you. We should have a gift, Connie, for the best question.
A free library card.
Yes, sir.
There's probably a lot of aspiring writers in here, novelists. The market has changed tremendously. What advice would you give to young writers about publishing? Self-publishing, going with the established book publishers. What would you advise them?
That's a great question and a really important issue. I think for writers like myself, I began my career when the traditional publishing industry was sort of doing relatively well. The internet was beginning to ruin, the recording industry, but everyone in publishing was like, oh, no one will ever read, an ebook. That was like, the future, and it seems like science fiction. And now we're obviously in a completely different cultural moment. I'm afraid that whatever advice I might give will be outdated, like next week. But it's a real challenge. I mean, I think that it's not entirely clear what the economic model going forward is. Musicians can give away records and MP3s and tour and make money that way. But novelists can't do that. I mean, and periodically. In Peru, my books get pirated, and I know that there's digital copies of my book floating around on the internet, and it's got a bunch of editors in New York quaking their boots, and it's got a bunch of writers sort of wondering where the next check's going to come from, and I don't really know what to do about it. I do think that in terms of being a reader, it's a great time to be alive. You can read anything you want, and in terms of being a writer, if you just want to create an audience. There's ways to do that now where you don't have to go through the filter of the gatekeepers in New York. Now, the reason why the gatekeepers exist is because they amplify your message. If the New Yorker puts their stamp on you, that's why I'm here, and I owe everything in my career, or not everything in my career, but much of my career to the good fortune of, certain editors who liked what I did and, decided to publish me. I think it's a really complicated time. I don't know what to tell you. I think there's certain places where if you want to be taken seriously, you can't self-publish. But probably those are completely archaic formulations that will have no relevance at all in 10 years. Amazon's Kindle singles or whatever. Now there's major authors publishing directly with Amazon. I would never do it just on principle. I believe in bookstores and I believe in libraries, but I can't deny that there's something incredible about being able to have access to all of that. A book is a very difficult thing to get, and you can download it in a minute. But where's the profit coming from? Or not even profit. Where am I going to pay my rent from, man? That's a huge question. I have no answers. I'm sorry. That was a terrible answer.
Yeah, thank you.
I really don't know. I'm sorry, sir.
Do you own an ebook reader?
I don't, and I've been wrestling with this for a long time. Part of me, I would like to have one, if only for my periodicals, because I travel a lot and I want to be able to get my magazines on time. And for some reason, out in the West Coast, certain magazines don't arrive they'll come a week late. My wife gave me a Kindle actually 2 Christmases ago, and I returned it. And it was a huge controversy in the house. So it's been made clear to me that if I ever were to buy one, I have to buy it myself now, of course.
What did you exchange it for?
What did I got the money back.
Oh, he got the money back. He didn't even exchange it. He just got the money back.
No.
Well, you mentioned music a lot. Do you listen to a lot of music while you're writing, or is that...
No, not while I'm writing.
Oh.
Occasionally while I'm reading, but no. While I'm writing, I silence.
Do you listen to San Francisco bands? What do you listen to?
I listen to a lot of jazz. I listen to a lot of Latin music, a lot of African music. I DJ parties in Oakland from time to time, and mostly play Latin music, like salsa, cumbia, that kind of stuff. But you can't write to cumbia.
No.
It's a terrible idea. There must be somewhere, in Colombia or Monterrey, someone writing the next great cumbia novel, but it's not going to be me.
Well, I wonder, before we hand it over to Connie to say goodnight, can you, I don't know if this is too long a story to ask you to tell, about the real-life list that you were given when you were
Sure.
young anthropology graduate.
Well, I was living in Lima, and I was living in a neighborhood of the district of San Juan de Lurigancho, and there was a family on the corner, and they sort of were looking after me. And I would often go over there and talk. And the gentleman who lived there was a man named Lucho Arones, and he and his family and many of the residents of the neighborhood had come from Ayacucho, and a lot of them had come after a killing. This was all stuff that I would learn later. They were from this town called Cangallo, and we were talking one night, and he asked me what I'd studied, and I told him anthropology, and his eyes lit up. He said, "Oh, you can help us." And I said, "Okay, sure, I'm happy to help." And he went to the back room and came back with a folder, and in the folder, he took out a piece of paper. It was typed, and it was a list of names and ages. And he handed me this list, and he told me that there was a killing, and these were the names of people who'd gone missing, and they thought these people were buried at the edge of town. And so he thought that I was a forensic anthropologist. And really, I wasn't anything. I had an undergraduate degree in anthropology, which is useless. And he had given me this list because he wanted me to help him present a petition to the Truth Commission. At the time, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Peru was doing their work and writing their report on what had happened during the war. Very controversial because a lot of people, as I said, there was sort of this institutionalized amnesia, didn't want even this apolitical project to take place. And this gentleman, Luis Arones, wanted his town's killing to be in part of the report, but to do that they had to write a petition to the commission. So he asked me to help him, and I had to tell him, of course, that I was completely unqualified, that I had no idea how to dig up a grave. That wasn't what I did. But I thought about it, obviously, and the sort of shock of holding a list of names and realizing that each of those names represents a life, and each of those people are dead. And there were some names that you can see that they were family. They were father and son, you know. And you can see by the ages, you can see by their last names, they were related. And it was a terrible, terrible, very helpless feeling. And certainly the list in the novel has that list as its real life reference. You know, I don't think I could have written the list in the novel, the one that Victor carries to the radio station and shows Norma, without having held that same list in my hands.
Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. And thank you all.
I know if you're like me, you are reluctant to see the evening and the conversation come to an end, and we are very lucky that Mr. Alarcón was kind enough to say he would sign books, and he is going to be here for a while. We're having food set out in the back. We invite you to relax, enjoy, and before I let you go, I'm going to ask two favors. One is, this is just the beginning of Imperial County's search for democracy. We are going to be having other programs in connection with this theme. Rebecca Solnit may be coming in person or by video conference to Camarena Memorial Library, and news about that will be broadcast in a similar manner if you're interested in joining that program. And we will be holding in the Imperial County Library branches, particularly Calpatria and Holtville, discussions around the issue of searching for democracy, utilizing all of the 5 titles that were chosen by the Cal Humanities organization and the many readers that participated in this project. So we invite you to sign up with us if you'd be interested in coming to one of those conversations, and whether you've gotten a chance to read the books or you later get to them, joining in, looking at what makes a democracy, what's crucial to it, and what do these books have to say about that to us for us to think about in the ongoing conversation. So this is just the beginning, not the end. But before you leave, I would ask, please do give us your evaluation of this program. We have forms and pencils that will be being distributed, and we'd appreciate your feedback. And again, thanks to our funders, and special thanks, Mary, for your great questions and for your always interesting responses, Mr. Alarcón. Thank you, and enjoy.
Thank you all.